going to provide some updates of some research conducted in many areas across the state over the past year. So going to try and clip through some information on about 3 different weeds here over the next 25 minutes or so. But before that, usually the number one question this time of year is, when is the weed guide going to be coming out? And so we will have the blue cover this year. I am hoping the weed guide will actually be posted online, hopefully today. So that will be online shortly. As far as physical copies, they are at the printer, and they will be available maybe the end of this month, but more likely early January. We will have those available at the places that you normally get the weed guide. One important point that you'll see in the weed guide for soybean. So at printing time, and as of right now, we do not have any registered dicamba products for use in XtendFlex soybean next year. There is the possibility, maybe even probability, of getting these labels back within Q1, so January through March of 2026. If that is indeed the case, we will update the online version of the guide to have that information included. So if those labels come out before the planting season hits, the online version of the guide will be different than the printed version to reflect the dicamba labels returning for use in XtendFlex soybean. But at this point in time, we still do not have registered products to use in soybean next year. So moving into the weeds I want to cover today. So kochia, continuing to be problematic across the state. We've been tracking group 14 resistance for really the last 3 or 4 years now. So this map here, if the county is in green, we have confirmed a population resistant to group 14 herbicides. If the county is white, that doesn't mean it's not present in that county. That simply means we have not received any confirmed population. So my best guess is we could probably fill in all the counties on this map if we got the right populations, because it is quite prevalent north of the border, and Montana and South Dakota are also seeing increasing cases of group 14 resistance. So we're just finding more populations with that resistance, and that can be problematic, especially in the burn down situations, in some cases with some of our residual herbicides. So some of the data I want to present, a project funded by the Soybean Council the last 2 years, just kind of revisiting metribuzin and sulfentrazone from a residual standpoint across the state. There's a weed control and a crop safety component to this research. Just be sharing the weed control results this morning, just due to time's sake. For the crop safety, the real cliff notes there, we have not really seen yield loss. We have seen the occasional hits of injury with a half-pound active of metribuzin, especially on some of the coarse textured soils, and certainly the metribuzin labels reflect that. So I know Jeff mentioned pay attention to soil type. If we do get the rate too high on a soil type, we can get injury. That has not reflected in yield for us, though. But some of that data will be presented more thoroughly in other areas throughout this winter. But for today, just wanted to kind of highlight some of the weed control results from this year. So still kind of some early preliminary data analysis on this. But the next couple slides will be laid out basically the same. We'll take 2 slides to look at kochia control. We'll be looking at the results 6 weeks after planting. We're going to start with Hettinger and Carrington, so 2 of the REC sites. And again, I usually put the number or the letters on top of the bars to indicate statistical difference. This point in time, I just kind of put down the real cliff notes at the bottom left corner of the next couple slides. So, for instance, the Hettinger, anything over 85% control was the greatest weed control at that site in 2025. Carrington, anything over 94% control was greatest. And so kind of the main things to take away here, Carrington, both this year and last year, did not get the best control from sulfentrazone. We have confirmed that population is resistant to group 14 herbicides, and this particular population seems to be challenged when applying sulfentrazone to it. Otherwise, metribuzin, we can get kind of a range between mid-70s to even mid-90s in some cases with that higher rate. But if we want to get to that consistently higher level of control, it's when we start looking into those tank mixes. So either the high rate of metribuzin and low rate of sulfentrazone, as described on the previous slide, or vice versa. But essentially getting some pretty good control over 90% even 6 weeks after planting. So we go that far out without a post herbicide to test the system, but really in all these cases, we should have had a post-emergence herbicide on 2 to 4 weeks before this rating date. Again, just showing how these herbicides can work in combination together. Two other kochia sites, Dickinson and Minot, from this past year. Dickinson in gold, basically anything over 74% control was the greatest at this site, and Minot anything over 78%. So again, our eyes are drawn to the right side of this chart, where the combinations of metribuzin and sulfentrazone together, in this case at both sites, really didn't matter the rate of each one. Once you had them both in combo, that was giving us the best control. Then our next best shot was that half-pound active of metribuzin at these sites. So again, just kind of highlighting that it's pretty reflective of what we saw in 2024, and we'll be presenting kind of the full data set later this winter, but just kind of a quick look at 4 of the central and western locations results on kochia this year. So switching gears to water hemp. So this weed continues to spread north and west. In fact, plenty of questions from Manitoba this year for anyone tuning in from north of the border. It sounds like it's continuing to spread up there as well. But within our state, we are continuing to see a spread, particularly along these northern tiers of counties and westward as well. So I know the north central part of the state has found plenty of dense populations late this summer. So it's just something to continue to keep an eye on. We'll continue to talk about water hemp, especially with regard to soybean production, as it just continues to be one of the top weed escapes once we get it established within a geography. The other thing that I would like to point out with water hemp, for those not familiar with dealing with it, once you get water hemp, you want to assume you have group 2 and group 9 being glyphosate-resistant water hemp. We are finding more and more group 14 resistant water hemp populations. So with group 14 resistant water hemp, the main thing for consideration is this is resistance to our post-emergence group 14 herbicides in soybean, things like Flexstar, Cobra, or Blazer. We do see some reduced sensitivity to things like sulfentrazone and flumioxazin when we have group 14 resistant water hemp, our soil-applied group 14s in soybean, and we are just finding more and more populations. A lot of this is due to a result of the weed screening we're doing with the National Ag Genotyping Center, which is, of course, partially funded by the Soybean Council. But so those are the maps, again, with confirmed populations with that water hemp. So just focusing some more on some water hemp control data. So this is once again the combination of sulfentrazone and metribuzin that presented results on kochia a couple of slides ago. At our location here in Fargo, now we're looking at 2024 in the gold bars and then 2025 in the green. Pretty similar story to what we were discussing with kochia, and the fact that once we get into our combinations, that's when we're starting to see generally better weed control. A couple of important points for water hemp versus kochia, and this site specifically, 2024, this trial was underwater for about 3 straight weeks. 2025, we had about 2 weeks where it was underwater. So any of these single active ingredients, especially at the lower rates, were certainly challenged and did not provide adequate control at 4 weeks, let alone at 6 weeks after planting. The higher rates, and particularly in 2025, when the trial was underwater for a less amount of time compared to 24, those higher rates of both products did hold on quite well. But really looking at the combinations, if we're just looking at those 2 active ingredients, wanting to have those in combination to give us the best chance for good water hemp control from our residual. Now, for water hemp specifically, we do have a more robust data set to expand out, certainly beyond just those 2 herbicides. So presenting these couple slides a few times last winter, but not at the Getting It Right meeting last winter. So we had a very large data set from 2023 and 2024 on our water hemp population near Fargo. Important to note, those 2 years, in 2023, we were quite dry after planting. We got less than a half inch of rainfall within 14 days after putting the residuals on. And it took a full 4 weeks and 10 different small rainfall events to get our first inch of rainfall in 2023. Contrast that to 24, and that's where we got quite a bit of rainfall, 6 inches within the first 21 days after planting. This particular trial did not spend much time underwater, but certainly other parts within this field did. So just a very saturated condition in 2024. A main setup for the herbicides used in this trial, all residual. So started clean at planting and put these herbicides on. A main goal was looking at still this 1.5 pound of metribuzin, that's active ingredient per acre, but we wanted to tank mix it with different pre-emergence herbicides. And so some things we looked at were combinations of Valor and Zidua, essentially made our own Fierce, and then this was applied by itself or with a 1.5 pound of metribuzin. Same thing with Surveil at 3.5 ounces, Surveil plus Zidua. Fierce MTZ at a 1.25 pints, but the important note here is that rate does not have a 1/4 pound active of metribuzin, or certainly not a 1/2 pound active. So we spiked in additional metribuzin to make sure we had that same level of metribuzin, even with this product that has some mixed into it. Then we looked at 4 ounces of Spartan, and then this was legal in 2023. Again, great possibility of it being legal again in 2026. But looking at dicamba from a residual standpoint in this trial. Add all that up, it's 21 different treatments, so quite a lot of treatments here, but I like to highlight anything within this green box. This is 6 weeks after planting, provided the most control. So 85% or greater was the best control out of this site here. In general, that's where we had 2 to 3 effective active ingredients, and certainly when we had that higher rate of metribuzin. I do like to point out some of these individual active ingredients on the right side of this screen, because this will greatly contrast 23 to 2024. Some of the things I'd like to look at, Zidua in 2023 was only 15% control, which is generally considered one of our best pigweed products. But again, remember, we had very low rainfall conditions, and this product does generally require higher amounts of rainfall for best performance. Dicamba in 2023, under the dry conditions, about 60% control by itself. You'll see here in another slide or two, once we get wet conditions, that greater control out of a product like dicamba does slip away. So showing some of the differences we can have when we just rely on a single active ingredient to control our weeds versus a more robust tank mix or pre-mixture program from a residual standpoint. And just a picture by way of comparison. So here's 2023, 6 weeks after planting. So here's where we have our non-treated on the left. On the right side here is where we had just Fierce MTZ by itself. This was not adding an additional metribuzin, so showing some of the good control we still had 6 weeks after planting. In this case, we actually still had the escapes. We're about 3 to 4 inches, so we'll probably be able to get in there and clean those up. Would certainly have liked to apply that earlier, but just kind of some comparisons there. 2024, a larger number of treatments made this kind of greatest level of control within the green box. Anything over 80% control ended up being the best statistically within the 2024 season. Again, this was a very wet year for us. Some of these individual actives I want to point out again. That dry year, Zidua, we had 15% control, 86% control after 6 weeks in 2024. So just showing how that product can vary differently under dry or wet conditions if you just rely on that single active ingredient. So in these conditions, very effective, but can certainly have some difficulties under different circumstances. Dicamba, down to 13% in 2024. So that's a product that we have gotten a lot of utility out, adding it pre-emergence. Certainly in our drier years, but in a wet year, it's very water soluble and tends to go away rather quickly. So again, just highlighting what does continue to work. A lot of these that are in this bar in 2024 were also the best control options we had in 2023. So once you mix together different active ingredients, you're going to have different levels of water solubility. And as long as we're using effective active ingredients against something like water hemp, these mixtures in this case were quite productive on a dry year and a wet year. So one of the reasons we continue to talk about having multiple effective sites of action, in this case, so the main difference in these 2 years for us at this research site was moisture. And multiple effective active ingredients helped us keep those plots pretty clean deep into the season. As far as post-emergence, so we compiled about 2 years ago, we compiled all of the research at this particular site near Fargo from 2019 through 23. So that's 5 different site years. And we looked at every time we applied post-emergence herbicides in soybean on 3 to 4 inch tall water hemp. Ended up being about 500 different instances where we had that occur at this research site. We further broke that out into when we had post-emergence applications by itself. So when all we did was plant our soybean, wait till water hemp was 3 to 4 inches tall, and then apply post-herbicides, or when we followed a pre-emergence program of any sort. So it had a pre-herbicide on, and then when the water hemp that escaped that residual got to 3 to 4 inches, we made our application. Major focus on the traits we can use in herbicide-resistant soybean, so glufosinate or Liberty, 2,4-D in the form of Enlist 1, tank mix of glufosinate and 2,4-D, and then dicamba, either in Ingenia or Extendamax for that half-pound per acre rate that we can use within soybean. When we only apply those products without a residual ahead of them, these were what the compiled data look like. So the number on the top of each bar is the average weed control over that 5-year period. So every time we applied glufosinate, we got on average 80% control. The top and the bottom of these tails are the minimum and maximum that we observed. So we actually saw a range of 40 to 100% control from glufosinate when we applied that to 3 to 4 inch tall weeds. So showing how variable that can be, even though on average we're getting 80% control, when we again do nothing and just go after water hemp with glufosinate when it's the appropriate height on the label, about 3 inches. Then 2,4-D, a little bit less. The tank mix of glufosinate and 2,4-D has been very consistent for us. So one of our better post-emergence options. Dicamba was a little bit less than 2,4-D, and we've seen that consistently on this population that out of the auxin herbicides, 2,4-D is a little bit better than dicamba on water hemp at this research site. Same treatments when we followed a residual herbicide program. All these numbers increased, so the average control was greater, and it was more consistent. So now if I look at glufosinate, about 85% control was the lowest that we saw, and we did go up to 100% in control on this scale. Basically, every time we followed a residual with glufosinate and 2,4-D, we were basically getting complete control. So it's showing how that was consistent, or one of the more consistent ones when we didn't have that pre, but when we have a more comprehensive program, a very good program we can put together within our traded platforms. And then the 2 auxin herbicides are the orange and the yellow bars by themselves. So again, just kind of showing some of the things for consideration with herbicides for control of something like water hemp, that it really starts with that residual herbicide and then timing out that post-emergence application quite well and putting that together as a program. So the few minutes I have left here, I did want to talk about common ragweed. So this continues to be more and more problematic in soybean, especially plenty of issues within the non-GMO soybean market. And so we do have a population we're working with now that is resistant to groups 2, 9, and 14. If I just kind of round out ragweed globally, there is some group 4 resistance in Michigan to clopyralid or stinger. And there is some group 5 resistance in other areas of the U.S. and Canada to linuron, which is Lorox, which we can use in soybean, atrazine, and metribuzin. So there's a couple of pictures of ragweed here. I always like this to point out this one in the bottom center, just to show actually right here in the top part, hiding is a water hemp seedling compared to common ragweed. So common ragweed will tend to be more competitive to soybean earlier in the season than water hemp. It is much larger and has a faster growth rate earlier in the season. Water hemp will have a slower growth rate, but continues to be one of our top weed escapes for a multitude of other reasons as well. But just focusing on ragweed here, this is the population we're working with. Before we kind of were able to work with it, it's basically had a history of sulfentrazone pre-emergence, famecifin post-emergence, and saflufenicil or sharpen as a desiccation. So a long history of Group 14 and Group 2 herbicides on this population, and quite an aggressive and robust population that we are working with. Two quick trials I wanted to show here. Both conducted just for the first time this past year. We're trying to see how these different individual actives are performing on this population. So a couple of Group 14 herbicides. Part of this is confirmation of resistance. So Valor, Spartan at 2 rates, then 3 different rates of metribuzin. Then we also looked at Sharpen. Command we don't use a whole lot of, but we did because it does have some common ragweed activity. And then First Rate and Lorox. Quick results here, 4 weeks after planting. Basically, confirmation of Group 14 herbicides not providing much in the way of control. Even 12 ounces of Spartan not providing much control. Command about 50%. Lorox, which is actually typically rated good on ragweed, about 20%. So we may have to follow up if we have linear-on resistance within this population. But the other Group 5 herbicide, metribuzin, worked well, particularly at higher rates. So once we got to a half-pound metribuzin, 70% control, and up to a 3/4 pound, near complete control of this population. Just kind of showing what this looks like for metribuzin. Next couple of slides, non-treated on the left, rate titration of metribuzin on the right. So here's a 1/4 pound, half pound, and here's that 3/4 pound metribuzin. In this case, this is 6 weeks after pre-emergence application. 8 weeks after planting, here's one of these metribuzin at 3/4 pound, and here's every other treatment within this replicate. So it's just kind of the visual contrast of how well that held up deep into the season compared to many of these other treatments. Post-emergence, looks like I didn't finish out my chart this morning right before hopping on, but rates were typical rates we use in soybean, some of our Group 14 herbicides, a couple of the Group 2s, and then what we can use in our traded soybean platforms. Point out with our Group 14s, Cobra, Flexstar, Blazer, whether this is common ragweed injury or soybean injury, the numbers were about the same. So did not control this population at all. Products like Varisto and First Rate did not even touch it post-emergence. It really took some of our options we can use in traded soybean to get some control. So this is one of the reasons this continues to become more problematic in non-GMO soybean because we just don't have the options post-emergence, and we're challenged with our pre-emergence options to date. So there is glyphosate resistance in this population, so this number is more reflective of the survivors. So we're seeing about 30% resistance within this population. Glufosinate by itself and the tank mix with 2,4-D were both pretty comparable. 2,4-D by itself was only giving us about 60% control, so that's something we're going to take a closer look at. Next year, we're going to have a lot more robust herbicide programs at this site next year. So that just kind of wanted to finish up. If you ever listened to War Against Weeds podcast, we're still going. So we have about 15 to 30 episodes, well, 15 episodes in the fall and then 15 in the spring. I believe today's episode that is released, we talked to folks like Daryl Richardson, and he talked about Delta T and how Endon may be useful for your weed control purposes. So always encourage folks to take a listen to some of the episodes. Otherwise, kind of just finishing out here, the one thing I wanted to highlight with the minute or so I have left is registration just went live about 2 hours ago for the Wild World of Weeds, which will be on January 20th this year. So we'll have some of this data and then data from other folks as well presented at that workshop. So we'll be advertising that more heavily now that registration is up. And again, look for the 2026 Weed Guide to be online soon, and then printed within the next month and available wherever you like to pick them up.